Death. Now, it's something that comes for us all. Whether you be man or woman, rich or poor, it's completely indiscriminate. It is the great equalizer, as many a scholar would say. However, what happens when someone's death completely overshadows what they did in actual life? Or even worse, it makes the rest of us question our very existence and our place within this universe. Well, that's what happened one balmy September day in 1988. A body was discovered on the banks of a reservoir in the country of Brazil. A corpse so horribly mutilated that it was questioned whether or not it could be attributed to an actual human being. You better strap yourselves in for this one, folks, because personally, this is one of the most distressing and highly disturbing cases that I've ever come across. So without further ado, I present to you the frightening case of the decaying corpse on Billings Reservoir.
September 29th, 1988 was a rather normal summer day in Sao Paulo. The air was still and the clouds were wispy. Nothing at all to suggest the horror that would soon be discovered on the large man-made lake just south of the city. The Billings Reservoir was deceitful in the peaceful and serene exterior that it presented to onlookers. Many accidents and tragic deaths were known to occur at the reservoir, and those that were familiar with it knew to approach its waters with trepidation and respect. Reports say that on that muggy afternoon, a local youth lounging the hours away on the southern banks made a terrifying discovery. Spotting a gaggle of large vultures on the opposite bank of the waterway, the young boy disperses them by hurling a stone in their direction. His curiosity turned to shock when he realized it was the impossibly mutilated body of a man. The boy ran in terror to the nearest village residence and reported to the locals what he had just encountered. Within hours, the authorities were on scene and were presented with something none of them were quite prepared for. The area was quickly cordoned off, and by day's end, the region was swarming with police and medical personnel. But as strange and horrifying as the discovery was, even stranger was the fact that the incident wasn't covered by any local news or journal outlets. One would think that something of this magnitude would make national, even international headlines, but it didn't. The attending investigators were all the quick to collect the body, make some inquiries, hastily bag the evidence, and slip out of sight. By the next day, there was little to suggest that anything unusual had happened in the first place. Local detectives were keen to quiet any murmurings of the case, and the incident faded from memory rather quickly. Some say this was done to stifle any panic over possible gangland activity or connections. However, others point to the hallmarks of an obvious cover-up. The case sat gathering dust for some 6 years, until a coroner's report and some graphic photos were inexplicably leaked to several press organizations. To this day, it is a mystery of who pushed this case back into the spotlight. Rumors persisted that several agencies within the Brazilian government were so disturbed by the discovery of the body, they were hell-bent on letting the public know. The information that would come flooding out in the next few weeks during that tenure in 1994 was so unsettling that it made people question whether any human hand could have committed such a brutal crime. There are conflicting reports on whether or not the actual identity of the victim was ever determined. Some sources say that he was eventually identified through dental records, while others maintain that the body remains as a John Doe to this day. In any case, if the man was given a name, we here at Penalty of Death Productions did not find such information. The one thing that everyone seems to be in total agreement with is that this individual suffered some of the most catastrophic, and some would say, impossible injuries ever witnessed in the history of forensics. According to the detailed autopsy, the eyes had been ripped out as well as the eyelids cut clean away. The tongue had been forcefully removed, the left ear had been surgically sliced off, the lips and adjoining flesh of the jawline had been almost melted off completely. In addition, nearly half of the jawbone had been pulverized with such excessive force that it was hard to comprehend how it was even possible for a human being to generate without the aid of some kind of machinery. Continuing on to the rest of the body, it was found that 2 identical puncture wounds were present at the center of each of the armpits. Similar puncture wounds were found elsewhere on the legs. Even more puzzling, it was discovered that a fair amount of muscle and flesh had been somehow extracted through these puncture marks. Now keep in mind, each of the small holes were no more than an inch in diameter, some quite a bit smaller than that. Without going any further, we must ask the obvious question. If someone wanted this individual dead, why kill them in such a brutal manner, only to later extract muscle and tissue through unnecessarily small apertures? But as you probably guessed, it gets even more bizarre from here. It was found that nearly all of the victim's internal organs had been unceremoniously removed. Liver, stomach, kidneys, intestines, heart, all were missing, the center torso shrinking down to an unnatural state as a result. Even more unsettling was the fact that there were no incision cuts to the torso, leading coroners to believe that the internal organs had been sucked out through the various small punctures found throughout the body. If you wanted to remove someone's internals, why on earth would you choose to do it in such a baffling and unnatural way? The report continued as it stated that on top of all this, not a single drop of blood was left within the body. And as almost an insult to injury, the victim was also completely castrated. When probing deeper, the manner in which the injuries were inflicted had an obvious air of surgical quality to them, all made with speed and precision. The report also said that the body curiously lacked the onset of rigor mortis, and equally as enigmatic, the body did not give off any smells or odors of decay. As stated previously, just before the body was discovered, it had been surrounded by vultures. However, there was no signs or indication that these birds were responsible for any of the various horrific injuries present. When a toxicology test was run, it was found, somewhat disturbingly, that there were no signs of sedatives or anesthesia in the body. There were also no signs that the victim had been restrained in any way. So one has to ask, just how were these immense injuries inflicted, without the victim flailing in agony? And if you're asking the question, no, coroners do not believe the injuries were administered post-mortem. To further support the claim that the victim suffered through these horrific injuries while still fully conscious, the scans of the cranial cavity showed the presence of something known as a cerebral edema, mostly present due to the individual suffering an agonizing end. The official cause of death, as stated in the autopsy, was cardiorespiratory arrest, brought on by extreme pain. In simpler terms, the victim died because of the unimaginable amount of pain he must have been in. Can anyone think of a more horrific way to expire? The rational explanation was that this individual died after a long, strenuous swim in the reservoir. The pain he experienced were the result of his heart giving way and his lungs collapsing. The various injuries were the product of scavengers such as rats, insects, and birds, who had started to eat the body whilst the man was still alive. Yet, as expected, the public at large were not buying this story. It would have been nearly impossible for any animal, whether by itself or in a pack, to inflict the sheer level of injuries as suffered by this man. Much of the public outcry came in the form of people immediately accusing the Brazilian authorities of an elaborate cover-up. Many officials within the São Paulo Police Department, as well as bureaucratic bodies and even military personnel, have been questioned regarding this case, and all have steadfastly denied any kind of secrecy or cover-up concerning this man's death. They contend that it was simply an unfortunate accident, and the victim's demise was brought on by natural, albeit unusual circumstances.
So you creeped out yet? I mean, the questions that spring up in this gruesome case are almost infinite. Even the most depraved of murdering psychopaths, modern or otherwise, follow at least some kind of logic when they hunt their prey. I mean, there's depraved, there's sadism, and then there's this case. Why would someone go through so much trouble just to kill someone, and furthermore, do it in the most unnatural way imaginable? Now, there's simply nothing about this unfortunate man's death that makes even the slightest bit of sense. But if you thought that we were done, oh boy, get ready, because it's about to get even weirder.
As is evident, most everyone who hears about this case does not agree with the official conclusion to this individual's death. Most seem to gravitate to a more paranormal explanation. Interestingly enough, this assertion does have a certain amount of credence when looking at the region that the body was found. Brazil is no stranger to the otherworldly and inexplicable incidents happening around the country during its long and storied history. Cryptids, monsters, ghosts and phantoms have all been a regular part of Brazil's myths and legends. However, when looking at this particular case, many point to an explanation that goes even beyond our own planet. A parallel has been drawn between this gruesome death and the multitude of animal mutilations that have been reported in almost every country around the world for well over 2 centuries. And when the subject of animal mutilations comes up, it is invariably followed by stories of unidentified flying objects and the nightmarish inhabitants they employ. Some experts in the UFO investigations community have theorized that this man was an unfortunate victim of alien abduction, and furthermore, is an example of something known as close encounters of the sixth kind. In paranormal organizations all across the globe, victims of the alien abduction phenomena tend to classify their experiences in 6 distinct categories. They are as follows. Close encounters of the first kind. These are simply anyone who reports seeing unusual aerial phenomena that they cannot attribute to mundane or terrestrial craft anyone would be familiar with. These reports are usually accompanied by drawings or detailed eyewitness accounts of the supposed craft or saucer-like objects flying in the skies. Close encounters of the second kind. These are UFO reports that are backed up by some kind of tangible evidence, such as video recordings, detailed photographs, or, in some cases, physical anomalies that accompany a supposed flying saucer having been in the immediate vicinity. This can take the form of disturbed landscape, burnt vegetation, or distinct impressions left on the ground. Close encounters of the third kind. This is where eyewitnesses claim to have directly seen or otherwise come into contact with the actual occupants or alien beings that are on board these otherworldly craft. In rare and mostly controversial instances, some individuals say that they have snapped photographs or recorded an actual alien on film. Obviously, none of these claims have been definitively substantiated. Close encounters of the fourth kind. Here we enter the crux of the alien abduction phenomenon. For several decades, people have come forward with often frightening stories of being forcefully taken against their will on board a supposed alien craft. This mostly modern cultural experience is credited with the alleged abduction of a married couple named Betty and Barney Hill, who tell the story of being kidnapped one night while they were on their way back from a trip in New Hampshire. These first-hand eyewitness accounts tell of harrowing and psychologically distressing encounters fraught with terror and trauma, as these eyewitnesses claim to undergo a barrage of medical and physical experimentation performed by the alien creatures. After their terrifying ordeals, these victims are said to be left with almost impenetrable amnesia afterward, and a phenomena known as missing time. Minutes, hours, days, or even years in rare instances cannot be accounted for during which the victim was supposedly abducted by these aliens. Their memories returning in the form of indescribable anxiety or sweat-inducing nightmares in which the victims are said to relive their frightening encounters with these entities, their full experiences only coming to full realization through intense sessions of hypnosis and regression. Close encounters of the fifth kind. These respondents, some to outlandish degrees, say that they have been in some kind of metaphysical or even supernatural contact with an alien presence. Some make statements that they are in regular telepathic contact with one or a multitude of alien beings. These encounters can range in messaging from simple greetings of correspondence to dire prophetic warnings or the prediction of future events that will affect mankind in some way. Close encounters of the sixth kind. The last and arguably most frightening encounter. These rare cases are said to result in direct injury, or yes, even death of the abductee. Similar in almost every way to the fourth kind, yet these particular encounters leave the victims with extensive injuries, or worst yet, cost the victims their lives. As stated before, these instances are so rare as to be almost unheard of. Many contend that the poor soul discovered on the Billings Reservoir is one of the only examples of the sixth kind.
Now the questions come to mind. What happened to the man on the reservoir? Was his death a mix of tragic but ultimately natural factors? Or was he, as many contend, one of the only examples in recorded history of aliens actually killing somebody? Now, for myself, I definitely believe that this boils down to something paranormal. Now, am I saying that I believe this guy was abducted by aliens and subsequently murdered by them? Not necessarily. But it does beg the question. Something happened to this guy, and something that, again, in my mind, defies all explanation. But of course, we'll ultimately leave it up to you, the audience, to decide. What do you think happened here? Tell us down in the comments below. But, as always, I'm Chris of Penalty of Death Productions, and if there was ever a time I would tell you to question everything and trust no one, well, this is most certainly it. But until next time, everyone, we'll see you in the near future. Peace out.